Have you ever wondered what goes on inside our heads? Or have you grown so attached to something you cannot separate yourself from it? Have you ever been so addicted to something and wondered why? Have you ever tried to break an addiction that you have and realize how difficult it is? Hi, I'm Tommy Hovivian, and my book for my semester project in AP Psychology is Unbroken Brain, a revolutionary way of understanding addiction by Maya Salovitz. Maya Salovitz tries to uncover the answers to these questions in her New York Times best-selling book, Unbroken Brain. Maya focuses on science, public policy, and addiction treatment in her writings. Raised in upstate New York, Salovitz is an award-winning author and journalist. Salovitz graduated from Monroe Woodbury High School in 1983 and attended Columbia University. She has won many awards from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the Drug Policy Alliance, the American Psychological Association, and the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology for her 30 years of groundbreaking writing in media on addiction, drug policy, and neuroscience. She has written countless articles for many substantial publications such as Vice, The Atlantic, The High Times, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and The New York Times. She has also worked in television, first as an associate producer and then a segment producer for the PBS Charlie Rose Show, then on several documentaries as well. She has been regarded as the best-known writer on addiction and related issues by Paul Rayburn at the Knight Science Journalism School at MIT. Maya offers unique insight into the development of the story because as an adolescent, she became heavily addicted to cocaine and heroin. She uses her prior addictions to better relate to the reader and to provide concrete examples to help the reader better understand addiction. These substances took over and controlled her life until she was 23 years old, when she finally managed to get clean and get her life back on track, something very few addicts can say they do. She uses her story often while doing interviews and writing books and articles to help the substance abuse community better understand addiction and to see it in a different light. In this book, The Unbroken Brain, Maya not only talks about her personal experiences with addiction, but she also uses science on brain chemistry and addiction philosophy to cover the history of the mind-altering drugs and the famous 12-step recovery process from addiction. This book offers a new way to look at addiction by describing it as a learned pattern of behavior used in soothing ways, such as coping with stress. According to Salovitz, addiction comes through the habituation of an action and not just from using a substance once or twice. Addiction is created when a substance has been used so much that the brain processes the experience as normal, habitual, or automatic. Later in the book, after her own personal story, she says the nature of addiction is more of a developmental problem that has prevented society from making effective treatment and prevention services. She offers alternative solutions that show promising insight to help stop addiction. Maya makes the point that addiction is a misunderstood coping mechanism that is not recognized by lawmakers in the public. Maya is not a huge supporter of the 12-step solving approach to addiction because it is often very harsh and even sometimes abusive on addicts. To her, it seems counterintuitive if you want someone to do something to then abuse them for something that their body cannot necessarily control. The 12 steps include: Step 1, admission. The addict admits that they are addicted and their lives have become unmanageable. Step 2, recognition. The realization by the addict that an outside power will be needed to help them break their addiction. Step 3, submission. The addict makes a decision to turn his or her life around and to give their life to God or a like figure. Step 4, understanding. The addict does a moral evaluation of themselves. Step 5, confession. The addict admits that what they did was wrong. Step 6, readiness. Addict asks God to remove these deficits from oneself. Step 7, humility. Humbly asking God to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, reparation. Make a list of people who have been hurt by their actions and become willing to make amends. Step 9. Apology. Addict makes amends to such people whenever possible. Step 10. Integrity. Continue taking personal inventory and when we're admitting to being wrong. Step 11. Meditation. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious and relationship with God as we understand Him. Step 12. Awakening. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. These steps are harsh and are quite hard to follow because they are vague. In some cases, the 12-step process is counterproductive because the addicts are too pressured to stop using the substance. The 12 steps can also be, to some point, dehumanizing due to the way people are treated while trying to recover from an addiction. Maya claims this approach doesn't always work, and sometimes addicts just need to be loved, cared for, and shown that they have value, instead of being forced to follow strict rules. The steps also put a great amount of pressure and stress on addicts to pull themselves out of their situation because they need to hold themselves accountable frequently to ensure that they aren't giving into the addiction again. Salovet's major opposition to this process is how people are dehumanized and how they aren't recommended to this process until they have hit rock bottom, which Maya cannot stand because it is so unjust. Maya is a huge supporter in more harm reduction problems to help combat a life without substance. She thinks addicts are broken humans and they deserve extra tender loving care and guidance to help them overcome their addiction and to get their lives back on track. This book ties into many chapters we have covered through this semester. One way it has tied into what we have learned in class this year occurred in our State of Conscious unit because that chapter refers to the science behind different addictions to different types of drugs and their effects on the human body. This book also talks about the various types of psychoactive drugs, such as stimulants, depressants, hallucinogens, and opioids, and how each of them affects the body. The majority of this book talks about drugs and how they are so addictive, but because the book I chose is on addiction and not drugs, Salovet talks about how addiction is not always what people think. My book and the textbook seem to have two different views towards addiction, even though they both offer valuable insights on addiction as a whole. Unbroken Brain and the textbook are similar in that they both state that addictions can be genetic and that they share the same models of addiction. Where the Unbroken Brain and what we have learned in class differ is that the book states that there are 4 stages of addiction. Some stages can be skipped, and addiction looks different for all people. The main difference is Maya believes that addiction is a developmental disorder. One can be more susceptible to become an addict due to timing and learning. It is more similar to ADHD rather than more of an illness such as the flu or cancer. Overall, the book seems to relate only to addiction in general and less on the psychological effects of addiction. From my understanding of where the field of psychology is now in 2019, this book seems to provide a healthy approach to how people should approach treating addiction today, to shift from viewing addiction as a disease and work towards more ways to help people combat their addictions. The approach this book takes is one that is both well-regarded and controversial. The author's claims are backed up to some degree because the author is a neuroscience and addiction journalist for Time and other publications, but they are also controversial because she claims addiction comes from habituation. Overall, this book's philosophy challenges the status quo and how people should view addiction. This book can help contribute in vouching for new approaches in therapy because it completely changes the view on addiction from a disease to a learning disorder. Learning disorders are easily changed compared to diseases because learning disorders can be enhanced through habituation. This approach can be reinforced in therapy, where slowly making smaller decisions to combat one's addiction that can lead to one overcoming his or her challenge. This book can help change the approach to modern addiction therapy.